Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about bolstering business. I'm Jenny Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in Carmarthenshire.
And I'm Kloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
Welcome to the show, everyone. It's great to be back.
Welcome.
And we have a repeat guest host, which we're really excited about. Would you like to reintroduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm Lucy Branch, conservator of sculpture and architectural features, and I run a company called Antique Bronze, which is also podcasting at the moment.
Yay!
So
Yay! Exciting.
It's a meeting of many podcasters.
Today, this sort of came up as a conversation sort of via email between you and me, Lucy, and also because people were sort of curious about something that was sort of adjacent to freelancing and adjacent to the side hustle episodes, which is sort of conservation work that isn't bench work, but it's still conservation. And it sounds really nebulous because it sort of is, but we're going to see what we can do. We're going to talk about these other ways of bolstering business is what we named it on our spreadsheet, by the way, and it just kind of stuck. So apologies for the slightly stuffy title. I'm sure I could think of something funnier, but there you go. Sometimes titles aren't all that funny.
So this is using one's actual conservation as part of one's business, as a conservation business, rather than side hustle, which was more like I also walk dogs, or I also adjust clothes or do belly dancing. I just chose mine. That sort of thing.
I do think, though, that these extra things make us much more well-rounded conservators.
Oh, definitely.
Because we're much richer for all these extras that we're bolting onto our professional lives, I think.
It's the skills, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like I wouldn't be half the conservator I am if I wasn't also an insane crafty person who just loves making things. So, there is that, certainly.
But the thing is that I think that it's a field that's got so many aspects to it that actually the idea that there could be little prongs that go off into other directions, but from the central point, I think works really well in terms of, having other dimensions to your business or your profession. And it certainly does make you more resilient to have other things around you because you never know what the world's going to throw at you and how it's going to affect your life going forward. So I think it's definitely, even if you don't have that superpower yet, it's definitely one to be thinking about.
You mean like an international pandemic, you mean?
Well, yeah. Thinking about those extra ways to use conservation, but maybe out of the box, it has to make us a more resilient profession.
And it's not just, oh God, I'm making it bleak immediately, but it's not just stuff like the pandemic. Even before this time in our lives, we were talking about things in freelance episode, things like, you don't always have work coming in necessarily. Sometimes there'll be a lull, or something that slightly haunts me every now and then is like, what if I break my hand? Or like, what if
God, I have nightmares about that. Yeah.
What if I can't do bench work for a little bit for some reason? Or what if I'm pregnant and I can't use all the chemicals? Or like, what then? What else can we do? Because it's just healthy to think about.
But also it's actually really logical because a lot of what we do is incredibly physical, and inevitably we're all going to get older and maybe not be able, even if we don't have a catastrophe like damaging our hands, but being able to do quite such physical days. And if you're maybe in a role where there is a ladder that you can climb, there may be something more administrative or something less physical that you can go onto. But lots of us are not in that position. I actually look at the extra things that I do as almost like a kind of pension for the future. I'm thinking, okay, well, it may not be very big now. It might be a little thing, but it hopefully over time will grow and therefore become something that is able to help me when I'm not that able, when I'm elderly and in my dotage.
When we're old and grey.
Very well put. So what do we do then? Which ones? Because so you, Lucy, sound like you've developed quite a few ways and means. I'm thinking, I don't know, I make stuff for people, but that's not really conservation. The last thing I did was sort of some freelancing exhibitions conservation. And I know Jenny's always thinking about this sort of thing as well. So what are our experiences?
So for me, the largest segment that has grown out of the conservation work that I do that has nothing to do with the practical side is the fiction. I write novels and they are all based in our world. So the first series I've written, I've just published my fourth novel.
Congrats.
But the first three, thank you, they were all about, I had to, being a metals conservator, tackle the myth of alchemy. I mean, it was absolutely essential. Someone had to do a modern take on it. And so my world of metals, but I wanted to not so much in that first series look at conservation, but look at particularly around sculpture and looking at patination and looking at some of the techniques that we use and foundries use and things like this, and tried to tie it in with a bigger theme that I felt was a more general interest. And at the beginning, you know, you start something, you don't really know what you're about, but actually the hours of conservation that I used to do when I was quiet and actually manually working were a great moment to sort of feed the imagination. And so those books really came out of the work, you know, really tangibly came out of the work that I did. And this new series is set in a restoration studio, so it's kind of more like the repair shop, but with murder thrown in on the side. And I mean, you know, is very much rooted in what we're doing and giving people this insight into our world, because I've never met anyone that's not interested in what we do, but it's you know, I love chemistry, but people think I'm nuts. But I want to explain what it is about the chemistry that we're doing in conservation that actually makes it exciting and dangerous and thrilling. And so that's been a really, you know, I'm definitely not the first conservator to have done it, but it's definitely been a great source, and it is also a great extra income, and hopefully will be more so in the future.
That sounds wonderful. And I also really love, because we've vaguely talked about conservation featured in books or conservators in books. Like conservators in fiction, yeah. I think was the exact thing. A little bit in the past. And I love the notion that there's just more being made and that it's actually written by people who know what conservators are and do is better than the alternative when someone's just like, oh, that sounds like an exotic job. I have no idea what it is and I'm not going to do the research.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because the problem is we love it so much and we know so much about it that, you know, it's easy to get run down a rabbit hole about you're getting really interested in the ethics behind the thing that you're talking about. And suddenly you go, maybe other people aren't quite as interested in this as I am. And, you know, you have to be careful you're not going to actually end up boring people to death about your specific love. But actually being able to take it somewhere that maybe is more mainstream, I think you know, it's got to be good for people being able to access conservation as well.
So how do people find this then? I think this is a good opportunity to say what's it called and how do they find it?
So anywhere good books are sold. You can Lucy Branch on Amazon or Kobo or Apple, wherever you go, and also there's paperbacks and things like that. But I decided to do it under my conservator's name, even though I've done non-fiction as well. But the thing is that people say, oh, don't write. If you're going to write, you know, serious sort of non-fiction, do it under one pen name and another under another. But it's all my world. It's all the things that I love. So I wanted to make it obvious. And that's another reason why I have actually presented it on my business website. So in my blog and the company's blog, I put the books on the side because I do feel like they are directly relevant to what we do. It's not a complete tangent. So I feel like they've got a home there. And yes, it's not necessarily what you see on a museum website, but then they have shops and things like that, don't they? So
yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And it's also a good point because I do know that conservators who write fiction are not necessarily about conservation in any shape, way, or form, but they usually do so under a pen name so that they aren't associated with it, which is sort of an interesting move, and I can see the pros and cons. But I actually really like that you're like, no, this is what I do. Like, it builds into this thing that, this is going to sound terrible and brand imagey, but it is, because it means that people can support you as a practitioner, and they can buy your books and read your fiction, or they can commission you to do the work, or they can ask for your advice. Like, you're kind of giving people more platforms to support you, which I think is something conservators are famously bad at. Like, conservators are like, I am here for this mystical craft that I'm not going to tell you about. Why are we so hard to find and understand? And why are we making it so hard for people to support us? It's a little bit weird.
What the fiction did for me as well was got me thinking about how I could write more informally about conservation, which the non-fiction book that I wrote last year, although it's a kind of guide or a handbook, you might say, but it sort of made me feel like I could write more informally about conservation and actually earn something out of it too, that it didn't have to be quite such a heavyweight item. I could sort of tell stories about ridiculous things that happened to me, which is really what happens in much of my work. But actually that side of conservation, the sort of lighter side of conservation, for conservators, I think is also an avenue that is something that can bolster our work and our incomes.
When we talked about this, I think when we were talking about publishing your work, that there is this sort of expectation that it has to be massive and groundbreaking and really, really sort of super scientific and perfect. And the reality is that that's not most of our experience. The value of something anecdotal even, or stories about our experience, or this is what I tried and it was all right, it wasn't perfect, but this happened, is so valuable. And it's something that I think we're frightened, we say this a lot on this show, we're frightened to share the more casual stuff.
What this was really about was about the fact that I get asked an awful lot of repetitive questions by clients, very often similar things. And I thought, you know what, this could be useful for someone. It's just this idea of isolating down things that you're doing in your everyday life that actually could have a wider purpose, that could have someone else that it could be useful to, and especially if it's something you're doing repetitively, that's definitely a little bell that should say this could be bigger than what you are doing with it, because it's obviously relevant to more than one person. And I think that's a really good indicator of where you might have a different sort of avenue to go down.
Do we feel that this is the kind of thing that is very freelancer? And what sorts of things can freelancers do to do this that maybe isn't something that's really on the agenda of museum conservators?
Yes, this is quite a freelancer heavy episode, I think, but some of the things that I guess I can mention are things that I was sort of asked to develop for a museum commercial unit, in which case it was, okay, so what do you do when you don't have bench work coming in? And then also now, what are you doing? Because, obviously there was in-house work to do, but it was more about how do you earn money if you don't have bench work coming in at the time? So a couple of options for that. So, I mean, this is now more broadly applicable to both freelancers and, anyone needing to earn money in a museum setting, I suppose, because not all conservators do. Sometimes it's in-house only, and that's all good because that's a lot too. But things like that included options like bench hire. What if you used to have a much larger contingency of conservators? People retire, they don't get replaced. If you're now a smaller team of conservators, do you have a big lab, for example, or a big studio where there's always that extra bench where people just dump stuff because it's not really in use? Could you in fact hire that space out to freelancers who struggle to have their own space, for example? It's very expensive to pay for a workshop or a studio full time. Another thing that I remember looking at was if we could let other people use our equipment, for example. And this is particularly big, of course, for big institutions that have loads of equipment, not necessarily just freelancers who've bought something expensive and wanted to pay for itself. But any place that has some pieces of equipment, for example, that are useful to conservators, might want to consider renting that out to people, or like offering people to, okay, well, you can have it for a week's use for a set fee, or similar, because ultimately it would be nicer if it was free, but that's probably not going to be the case.
But also there's an aspect there of training people as well, isn't there? There's an aspect of being able to offer training on that piece of equipment, because you don't want people to go and ruin your beautiful item that they may not know really the ins and outs of.
Yeah, that's another point. And then that can, of course, be an upsell as well. We'll offer a day's training on it first. Definitely a really good point, Lucy.
Yeah, I think training is one of those things that people think about bigger institutions doing, but we've all got lots of small skills that actually other people, especially in the conservation field, how many times you've come up against something and thought, gosh, I just wish someone could show me this. And it's not, there isn't a video on YouTube by a lovely American person, which is what they usually is. But still, I think kind of small, more informal training, and even things that are done at quite short notice, because we're a small community, you can say, do you know what, I've got a couple of days free next week, and I've got this that I can show you how to do, or show, and even 2 or 3 people that's enough. That's definitely an income stream occasionally.
Training is definitely something to consider, and that can be aimed at other conservators. It can be friendly or informal. It can be done online now, because loads of us do enjoy a good webinar or online course, for example. We did a whole episode on basically teaching and learning remotely and all that stuff. So
I kind of was looking, a while back now, but looking at what museums do, how they manage to fund things. And you do see that they obviously build a brand around themselves, and they make money on the sides in lots of different ways by merchandising and selling things that relate to the identity of the museum. And I really don't see why this isn't something that conservators can do too. And I know that there's this idea that obviously if you work for an institution, you may not be able to do that. But I think in a sense, what we're talking about a lot with this is an identity of something and building a brand around it. And I'm not sure that you can't do that just because you necessarily work for a museum, as long as you're not obviously climbing into their patch, but your field of expertise can be something that you build an identity around and merchandise. And people do this incredibly successfully with obviously the music business and lots of people on Instagram and YouTube in other fields. So I don't see why conservators couldn't do that too. So that's something that I definitely think that I'll be exploring in the future.
That's so interesting, and I would love to see where you go with that. It tickles me somehow, it really does, but then I suppose as a creative it would.
Well, I can see the C word having some great merchandising items that people, again, it's this idea of being able to support your people that you want to support. And, going back to what you were saying earlier in the show, quite often one of my clients, I might go above and beyond what I've said I'd do. And I say to them things like, just pick up one of my books, give it to the charity shop if you don't like it. But, that idea that they can support you in some way that is kind of like buy me a coffee. But obviously you've gone back to your desks and you're not going to buy them a coffee. But this having other things which are representing you that people can tip you with, in a sense.
Yeah. Taking it back to the sort of tip jar idea, because this is a thing that I see creatives do a lot, and obviously this requires an online presence that conservators don't necessarily have. It will depend on the conservator, but something that you see a lot for example, artists and other creatives, musicians, for example, is if they put out content on social media, for example, like, hey, if you really like my tweets, if you like, I've seen historians do it, for example, if you like what I'm sharing about, say, Welsh folklore, then you can put something in my tip jar, and then there's a link to, not PayPal, but like a similar service, where you can just donate something because you like their work. And that is a model that I don't think enough conservators consider as something viable. Like, people's goodwill is also a thing that can help bolster your business. And that will, require a very different approach than the highly polished, hey, we are such and such limited.
Yeah.
We were established in the 1970s and we're the best ever at everything, and you can't see anything behind the scenes because we're too posh. Okay, guys, that's fine. But for other people, there might be an option there to instead go with Ko-fi, for example, which is another one. What's one I use, for example, which is literally the idea is you buy me a coffee. It isn't literally a coffee, but it's like it suggests spending £3 on me, which is the equivalent of buying me a coffee. Digital tip jars are, a genuine resource and something widely used by creative people and crafts people as well. And as I mentioned, historians now. So I don't see what we can't get on board there and have it as a way of, hey, do you follow my content? Do you like what I put on Instagram, for example? Well, then you can support me. It's easy. It'll make you feel good.
But, I saw someone recently do a tour, and I know this is like, what? A tour? Live events? But it was outdoors. The thing is, something they did which was really clever and struck me at the end, it was a free thing, and they were passing around the hat at the end. But what they said specifically, which I thought was clever, was, if you feel like my performance is worth £20, then it would be fantastic for you to show me. But I'm really happy if you just, want to, pass the word around for more people to join the tour at another time. But the fact that they actually planted a seed with the money that they wanted actually to be, lots of people don't know what to tip. They need that guidance. They think, well, I'm not sure what this content is worth. What is it worth? If you're brave enough to drop that seed in and say, maybe better than the way I put it, they were very good the way they said it, but they told people what they were actually after and how much they felt they were worth. And it really helped people. And, people are like, yeah, great, fine, no problem, took it straight out of their wallet.
This sort of thing is quite a big deal in belly dancing professionally for a British audience. Different audiences have a different understanding of tipping. The belly dancer, Turkish audience, far more used to this. But if you're in an audience of all British people, they think that it's rude and they don't know how to tip. Like, is it okay to tuck the money into the dancer's costume? How much money is it? Is a fiver insulting? Is what do you do? And so in the past, I've like New Year's Eve, when I've had several gigs, I've left the money tucked in my costume so that the next people
so they can see that that's what you can do. Oh, that's
on one occasion I actually just gave a friend who was watching me dance money so that they could tuck it into my costume, and then everybody else started tipping me. It was great.
That's actually phenomenal.
It's almost the same thing, but far more sleazy sounding.
But it is the same thing. It's the same core concept, and that's so important. It's just that people need to feel like they have permission.
Exactly.
It's much like you shouldn't start with an empty donation box. You should have a couple of coppers rattling around in it. This goes way back to like our funding episode, because we were talking about museum funding and like museum donation boxes, and how it should have like a call to action, like support us with £5, like suggest a donation, not actually you have to give us £5, because that's wrong. Tip jars and things like that, they are underused and underrated because they are brilliant ideas.
And they needn't be tucked into your lab coat.
Something I had considered was things like, sometimes you have to like bulk buy supplies and equipment to get a good price and stuff. And sometimes people won't even consider selling you something less than 100 meters of something, or like something ludicrous.
Oh, yeah. I've had that before. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's a real problem, right? Especially if you're, if you're running your own tiny business and you're like, Jesus, I need 5 meters, not 100. What do you do with the rest? Like, yes, it might be useful for a future thing, but it's a big outlay. But it's one of those things of, if you can find someone else to either clump together with, to just be like, do you want to go halvesies on this? Then that's an option. Or you can, depending on what it is, because it certainly won't work for everything, you might be able to sort of portion it up and sell it later to other people in a similar situation who are like, I need 5 meters, not 100. I'm just saying there's probably loads of room there for like maybe getting some of your money back for having bought something in huge bulk.
This is something that, as conservators, having a little bit of a chemistry background, is actually really more accessible to us, I think, than many people. So I've noticed that on Amazon, if you want to buy a little bit of acrylic wax, it's like £30 for a teeny tiny jar. And I'm thinking, well, actually, because we're using waxes all the time and things like that, we're sort of like, it seems like it's a really specialist item, but it really isn't a specialist item at all. So I think our understanding of materials as well, I think is wider. There are lots of applications for materials that we use in conservation, that we, particularly in the craft and arts field, that actually are quite scarce, hard to get hold of for some people. And I think there's definitely a competitive edge there.
So I think I'm intrigued by more of your out-of-the-box thinking. What other things have you considered?
When I began to go into the fiction and learn all about, publishing and all about the different aspects to that enabled me to learn more things like about how to podcast and how to market and how to... So from that one thing, definitely more skills grew, which were completely applicable to my conservation business. And, you can even go back to things like blogging and how to present a professional website and all of those things. If you're an independent conservator, you need to have a really good website. And that's a portal for you to have your service obviously go out into the world, but it's also something you have to pay quite a lot of money to get looked after by someone, and learning those skills means that, essentially you're saving money on that front, and they are totally learnable by any stretch of the imagination. So the out-of-the-box thinking, I think, more means that I've been able to add, say, a digital side of my company, which didn't exist before. We had an awful lot of skills that were sort of all kind of batched into one category. And what I tried to do is separate out the strands of what we did and look at how each one of those could be developed as a broader income stream. So it was sort of like untangling what was a bit of a ball of wool, because historically the way that we'd grown was just that it had served a very specific type of model, which, as times evolved and things went on, didn't make sense anymore. And so this idea of looking at each part of the business and saying, well, how can that, what would be applicable to that? And I do that every single year. I say, right, what other markets could this serve? Even though we are conservators, we serve quite a lot of artists, and they may be, it's not necessarily conservation work, it's original finish work, but our skills are absolutely the same, whether we're doing the original finish or whether we are conserving that finish later on. And actually it works perfectly, because the person, who has the object made will then want the object conserved, because you've had the platform to talk about how to do that and what the object needs. So actually coming in at an earlier stage makes complete sense, not only as a business model, but also for the health of the object in the future. So that may be a slightly more entrepreneurial aspect to the way that we certainly work. There's so many areas, because you could look at, trillion times a day people are asking me about the materials that we use, and they want specifically what brushes, what this, what that, and all of these areas. If I had enough time in the day, you could grow that field and say, right, I can recommend these, and therefore maybe be an affiliate for that company that you really think is an excellent brush maker or an excellent wax supplier. But again, that's about it all knits together. It's about cultivating a brand and trust and a feeling that you are doing good work, and it all comes from the conservation.
I really like that, because it's sort of just holistic thinking about how to run a business, and it's great, because that's just, you're just offering more. It's just good business, which sounds really dirty, but it is.
Well, I don't know. For me, business and conservation are not two separate things. I remember many years ago, someone saying to me, don't you think that's the fact you're making a profit out of this is kind of unethical? And I thought, no, I don't. I feel like I'm trying to do my best, and yes, I am obviously, paying my bills with that. But the fact is that if you pay attention to a job and you reflect on it, which is all part of our professional development, right? We should all be thinking about the job that's just happened. Yeah. You notice things. You think, right, that client asked about this, or they didn't understand that. And I constantly think, how could I make that, more useful to people? But also, yes, my time is going to be covered by that. Whether it's saying, oh gosh, that client was really interested in the history of that object. Is there other people that are interested in the history of that object? And could I present something for them? And it may only be a tiny stream of income, a little bit of work that you've done, but each one of those micro streams then builds on another one and gives you an opportunity to, cross-pollinate to other areas. So, I don't see entrepreneurship as being, unethical or not part of conservation.
Something that I wish I could see more people explore, and I'm strongly considering exploring myself, is just showing a bit more vulnerability as professionals. I see all these, wonderful people on, for example, YouTube, not conservators, but, in not totally crazy fields, something maybe craft-based or something, who are just pursuing what they love. They are doing it for money because they are running a business. But if you can't afford to buy their sculpture for £6,000, then you can give them a £5 a month just to say that I love what you do. Keep sharing it with me because it enriches my life. I hope that we can move to a world where conservators can do something similar, where we can share what we do and we allow people to appreciate it and don't just kind of mantle around it and go, nobody must see what I do, because what's the point? Surely we want to share these things. We're nerds, for goodness sake. Nerds love sharing what they do and what they love. So I think if we can embrace that, there's actually a lot of potential for there to be income streams from it.
One of the areas that really interests me it got me thinking when I saw this gentleman doing this performance, was just this idea of tours. Like it's a huge industry when when people are allowed to do events, is taking tours around cities and things like that. And actually, I think conservation tours could be another great stream of income, particularly if you are knowledgeable about a field, because it just shows you the repair shop and all these other great programs that are on have a huge audience and people want to learn about it. And it's not just museums who necessarily have the dominance over that. I think that, and it's that support, it's supporting the creator theme. They are, your time is being supported by, and it's what you know. So I think that it works really well for conservation, that exact business model.
There's one thing I think as well about the current time that particularly is brought to mind from what you're saying about tours and what you're saying about craft in the public eye, Jenny, is that I feel that we've sort of lost track of how much free content there is on the internet, whether it's video or audio or photographs or, an artwork that we can't have in our houses. And that stuff that people, they say, oh, subscribe to my channel or oh, support me on Patreon. Huge numbers of people don't. And the number of hours of YouTube that I watch, and I don't pay for anything of what I'm enjoying or whatever. And belly dancers on Instagram, I'm not paying them, but they're still sort of putting out content and they're still kind of entertaining me. I totally agree that there's a way that conservation can sort of, I don't want to say get in on that, because it depends entirely on somebody's own sort of expertise and comfort and what they feel that they want to provide. But
yeah, I mean the thing is though that when there's a situation where you are in business, whatever that business is, whether it's the kind that we're talking about now or more general, there is a huge amount of work you do for nothing, for no pay anyway. So whether or not you're putting content on to YouTube for free, you know that you're going to do a huge amount of work and only some of it will actually manifest into an income stream. And there's just, you have to know that if you're in business. I quote on tons of work, which
Absolutely.
I don't get. And I have a gazillion conversations with people. But what I do hope is you may not place the job with me this time, but maybe you'll remember me. And that's a tiny seed dropped in. And I always look at every job like that. I think, well, maybe something will come of it one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only problem is when other people come back and they expect you to remember them and you don't.
But so the point isn't necessarily that you will be paid for everything that you put out. That's not true at all. And as you say, we all enjoy content for free that we're not going to pay for. But the thing is that you give people the option, and some people will take you up on that offer, which is much like the tour. Some people will put money in that bag or hat or whatever it was, but some people won't. And I mean, a large part of why I don't pay for content is just because I'm poor myself and I'm not in a position where I can give anyone anything. But those people may in turn be more likely to recommend your work or say, I went to this amazing thing, or have you ever considered this person for that? They may instead be the people who become advocates for you.
So what about live events? I mean, has the C Word considered doing a big live event? I mean, that's a great way of making an income stream. Ticket sales.
We have. We have, but it was sort of pootled along in a sort of, wouldn't it be scary if we did this and also fun and then pandemic? But we really want to do a conference. We'd love to do a live streamed episode and get loads of people involved.
Yeah, no, it's definitely stuff that we've talked about for sure. Always open to suggestions as well. And I'm quite happy just to hang out with people as well, because that's just nice.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it doesn't all have to be money makers.
But not to be the psychologist here, but, we shouldn't have hang-ups about money. It doesn't make us bad people just because, what we're trying to live.
Yeah, that's the thing. But seriously, something to think about, maybe as conservators, that there are other ways that we can approach this. We can look to fellow people in adjacent fields, because I don't see why, I feel like when people think of influencers and stuff using these platforms, people think of like makeup artists or, I don't know, people who do loads of yoga on mountaintops or something. I don't know. But like they fail to consider usually that, no, there are loads of people doing this who do jobs that you maybe don't snare at so much, like historians and craftspeople. So there's no reason why conservators can't join those ranks. And maybe we already have. It's just I don't know of them. Yeah, I'm just saying it's not dirty. And again, money is not a dirty word and business isn't a dirty word. So those are perhaps the takeaways from this. So today I've found myself a familiar voice that you may in fact recognize from some of other episodes. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hello, I'm Lorraine. I'm a freelance conservator.
Hello, Lorraine. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Nice to be back.
So in this episode, we've talked about ways of sort of bolstering business as conservators, sort of alternative income streams. And I just thought I'd have a cup of coffee with you and pick your brains about it, because it's always nice to hear someone else's perspective as, another freelancer. It's just nice. But yeah, I know that this is something that you and I have sort of vaguely talked about before, like other ways of sort of earning money and stuff.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was part of a program called Star East, which is unfortunately ended now as a program, but all of their resources are still available. And I was able to get some one-to-one mentoring where looking at what I was doing and the benchwork, which was the main source of my income. It wasn't the most efficient way of earning money, nor the way that I was working that was making the most money. Now, I'm not saying that the work is all about making money, but this is what this conversation was around, about pivoting the business. So the mentor that I spoke to, a lady called Mita, she gave me an exercise to do, which was to look at where my income sources were. And that made me think about where that income was coming from, which I had always had in my head, but writing it down on paper made a really big difference. So although the majority of my work came from doing benchwork, it wasn't bringing in the most income. Where I was earning more money was things like training and workshops and doing preservation surveys and audits, so the consultancy. So that put me on a path of thinking about what, as a conservator, practical conservator, other things that I could offer that would allow me to have more variety. And I would also say resilience within the business, because had I not done that a couple of years before COVID hit, I probably wouldn't have had any income during 2020.
Yeah.
Because at the start of COVID, all of my practical work just disappeared. It just went overnight. As soon as that announcement was made for the first lockdown, the practical work just went. That really has not come back. We're now in 2021. What did continue was the work that I was doing as an assessor, the work that I was doing for training and workshops, the work that I'm doing around digital transformation with an organisation in Canada called Dance Collection Dance. So all of that continued, but the practical work didn't. So pivoting the business, looking at other ways that I could work, different things that I could do, has made a really big difference. And I have to say, I'm the sort of person that loves doing lots of different stuff anyway. So only doing one thing does not play to my strengths.
Yeah.
What plays to my strengths is doing lots of different things and having sort of 10 or 15 projects on the go at the same time, which is usually the way it is. So my business now is more around training and workshops. It's around preservation, so the consultancy, environmental sustainability, so actually going in to do audits around environmental sustainability and digital transformation. And one of the other things that I've found a really useful exercise is to list down and just mind dump onto a piece of paper 20 or 30 things that you do as a conservator. So that could be writing reports, so you've got a writing skill. It could be communication, so that you have to talk to people on Skype and put forward your ideas for treatment. It could be that you do your own accounts or you do your budget at work. So you've got numeracy skills. So sit down and list all of the skills that you have and just mind dump it. Don't think about what you're writing, just put them down. Try and aim for about 30. Then go back and look at which ones are transferable. When I did this, there was only one that wasn't a transferable skill. Now, that's not to say that you go off and you find yourself a job in accountancy, which might be what you want to do. And if that's what you want to do, then go for it. But it helps you think, okay, well, I can do this, this and this. So what within the cultural heritage world, the museum sector, the archive sector, wherever you work, uses those skills, and how can I use that skill to do other things?
Exactly. And I think that's a really positive way of thinking about it, because I think as conservatives we get really caught up in the sort of benchwork is the holy grail, it is everything that I want to do, and like it's fine if it is, but also sometimes benchwork dries up, and that would have happened even in non-pandemic times. There will be lulls, for example. It's not unheard of that people are busy all of the time, but also that's not the norm, I would say. I think that's quite rare that people just always have something to work on. It's grand if you are listening to this and you're that person. Bravo, clap. However, that's maybe not the case for everyone, and thus it's really healthy to look at what other skills you have, and then you can always find someone else to talk to and bounce ideas with if you feel like it's an overwhelming list, or even if you find that you might be struggling with thinking of good things to write on that list, then maybe find someone you work closely with, or a fellow conservator who's in a similar position, and just talk about your different strengths and things that maybe they see in you. I think that might be a really positive way forward as well.
Yeah, I think definitely what other people see in you, because we are usually our own worst critics. And actually having somebody else look at what you do and speak about what you do, it's so nice, because they're usually so complimentary, and they look at what you do and they see it in a completely different light.
And then, again, these can be just more strings to your fiddle, essentially. So if you're working freelance, then, it's just that you have a wider offer, and that's not a bad thing. And ultimately, I think this sort of exercise, I'm hoping, will give you confidence, because look at all the things that you are good at. It's not all about the perfect eye for color matching that, I don't know, piece of fabric. I don't know what you do. Dear listener, I do not know what you do, but that's fine. It's great that we have all these hyper-specific hand skills, but it's also great that we have loads of other skills that we really undervalue, I would say.
I was going to say, I think one of the ones we really downplay is our ability to problem solve.
Absolutely. And that's like my favorite thing about conservation. We're great problem solvers.
Yeah, we're amazing problem solvers. We look at an object, we start the treatment, we come up with a variety of ideas about what the object needs and how we're going to do that, and why the object needs that. Then generally we start a treatment, and you'll find, not every treatment does this, but some do. You'll get through it and it's not going the way you want, or the results aren't what you want, or the object is just saying that's not appropriate. So halfway through a treatment, you change what you're doing, and you're constantly problem solving. And I feel we don't see that within ourselves, our ability to problem solve.
I mean, arguably, it's one of our superpowers.
Yeah,
I guess there's just so much that we can do if we just sort of not step away completely from the bench, but just sort of look up and go, what else is there that I do really well? Because there's bound to be loads. Don't feel disheartened just because work has dried up. There are so many things that you can do, and that can then keep you going until your next hands-on job that might be the thing that you really, really desire to do. So just saying, there's hope out there, guys.
Oh, there's definitely hope out there. I mean, there's always ways to take your skills, look at your skills and think, I'm this brilliant person, which you are, and find other ways to use them.
Yeah, absolutely. So chin up, guys. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be fine.
If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special, like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Thanks for listening. We're The C Word, and you'll be listening to Lucy Branch, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasson. Join us next time for an episode about dyes. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at The C Word Podcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.
I don't know what, I'm getting a puppy on Friday, and I don't know what recording is going to be like with a puppy. It's going to be chaos.
Not great. Yeah.
It'd be fine. We'll just have to have puppy breaks.
But now the pressure is on to have a conservation-based name. Like, this is my puppy Paraloid.
Oh my god.
That's such a great idea.
We've already chosen the name. It is, isn't it? Hi, this is Kloe.
Oh. Oddly tickled by that now.
You can't scream that in the park, can you?
People be like, what?
It would be Lloyd for short. It'd be fine.